Akshay, what shaped you the most while growing up in India?
I feel like growing up, we had money for everything that we really needed and not money for everything that we wanted. In some ways, I feel like I won the lottery in being born in Gujarat. So Gujarat, the land of entrepreneurs, and Gujaratis are particularly known for being so enterprising.
Akshay, you mentioned luck multiple times. Can you share a story or an experience that really shaped your career in the US?
Luck would have had it in my last quarter at Stanford. We built Pulse, which was a news app. Spending 5.5 years at LinkedIn, I sort of felt like I had given everything I had to give to LinkedIn. And I think my default plan was to start something in India. As luck would have had it, I reconnected with Ivan, the Notion CEO. So after Pulse was acquired by LinkedIn, my first investment was in Notion in 2013. In 2018, it had finally hit some level of product market fit.
How has Indian ecosystem evolved over the years, and what are you most excited about?
Okay, what makes Silicon Valley is that they've had a few different generations of entrepreneurs, and each generation that wins funds the next generation. India is actually on that journey, right? It's like maybe a generation or two behind. Like people, who've worked at Flipkart or Dream11 or Hotstar, I mean, they've seen like crazy scale.
Today's pod was a special one. We had Akshay Kothari on the pod. Akshay is the co-founder of Notion, the connected workspace for your docs, projects, and knowledge. Notion is currently valued at $10 billion. Hosting Akshay was a lot of fun. We chatted about Akshay's upbringing in India, what shaped him the most while growing up in India, what made him move to the US, and his professional journey so far in the US. Pulse, LinkedIn, Notion, we covered it all. We also chatted about luck and what is he most excited about the Indian technology ecosystem and much more. Now I bring you Akshay. Akshay, so excited to have you on the pod. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Shiva. Excited to be here.
Akshay, a good starting point can be, we're really a byproduct of our environment. Uh, what shaped you the most while growing up in India, and later on, what made you move to the US?
Yeah, so I grew up in Ahmedabad pretty much through and through, from getting born there till high school. So I was there, and it's a good question. It's actually a question that I sort of reflect on a bit. Like in some ways, I feel like I won the lottery in being born in Gujarat. I sort of Gujarat's like the land of entrepreneurs, and Gujaratis are particularly known for being so enterprising. And then my own roots, my grandfather, grew up in Rajasthan. And, being a Marwadi, there's like a general business DNA that I was born with. And so this mix of, the Guju entrepreneurship and Marwadi sort of business sense is something that I didn't think about much when I was growing up in India. But when I reflect back now, I sort of feel like what a lethal combination I was born with. Um, and then of course, like I think seeing my dad and my granddad sort of started a textile business, and they were entrepreneurs in their own way. And my mom and my grandmom are both super creative, very crafty. Always creating things at home. And I'm in many ways I'm a product of that. A lot of my business sense probably comes from my dad and granddad, and a lot of my own creative um, uh, energy and sort of like my right brain thinking probably comes from my mom and my grandmom. And I have two brothers, one older, one younger, and in many ways, like our extended family was all in India. And my older brother, Pranav, who's now based in Bangalore, he was the trailblazer. He was the first person in sort of the extended family to come to the US. And then once he had done that,
Mhm.
it sort of like, laid down the path for me to do it also. And so I followed the footsteps, and both of us, and actually my younger brother too, all three of us came here to study engineering in the US. And yeah, so I think it's been I think I'm in my late 30s now, and I sort of reflect on this more. It's like what really shaped who I am today. And so it's a great question to start this podcast on.
Yeah. And Akshay, you decided to move to the US. I think you went to Purdue University, and then later on Stanford, and then you founded a company. Maybe walk us through that journey.
Yeah, so I went to Purdue for electrical engineering. I was sort of really fond of math and physics, so that seemed like a good pathway here. I really think the US college system really helped shape me in many ways. There's a few things that I think US colleges do that I think are quite underrated. One is that there's a lot of flexibility in the program, right? So, like, even though you're studying electrical engineering, I think maybe only half the coursework is actually electrical engineering. The other half is filled with electives that gives you like a more broad sort of understanding of you know, different domains. So I
Mhm.
remember taking courses in psychology um, and music and other engineering. So that's actually quite unique. I think the other thing is, I think even within engineering, I think the first year is about the same, and so like you can come in, learn the fundamentals, and then choose to change your career. Like if you wanted to, essentially move to mechanical engineering or industrial engineering, you could, you have the flexibility to do it, which I think is quite unique. It sort of releases this pressure where you feel like you're stuck somewhere.
Mhm.
Um, the other thing I really enjoy, and I think India is starting to see more of this, as internships. You have real internships in between your years. So you're spending the summer gaining practical experience, and that actually shapes what you actually take the next year. Um, so I did 3 engineering internships, and I learned a lot from that. Um, I graduated in 2007. This was like the peak financial sort of bubble in some ways. And I think the dream job when I was graduating was investment banking. And I think it was investment banking or consulting because it was the highest paid job. You were working crazy hours, you're living the New York life. Um, and so I sort of caught that, um, you know, caught that sort of interest as well
Mhm.
and decided I wanted to do that. So I actually interviewed with a lot of different banks and a lot of different consulting firms. Um, Sadly, I didn't make the cut for any of them. And maybe this is like one of the many blessings in disguise that I've sort of experienced in my life. So I didn't get in. And then I spent a lot of time in my last semester at college figuring out what do I do. And I got lucky in that one of the Purdue alums, Don Cypress, who's based in the Bay Area, he had taken a company public, and then he had used a lot of his personal wealth to start an investment business, sort of a venture capital business here. And he was about to make his first investment in a company in India. And so the university connected us, and I essentially just packed my 2 suitcases and moved out to the Bay Area to spend the summer with him. And the summer was really productive, and ended up joining full time. So I spent a year with him in the world of sort of venture capital, and it was fascinating. I mean, it sort of like gave me an introduction to startups, but also I quickly realized how little I knew about uh, any business, right? Because I hadn't, I mean, I'd done some internships, but I hadn't really worked for real at any company. I didn't have operational sort of experience.
Mhm.
And so, why should a startup founder listen to a 21-year-old with very little like work experience? And so I found myself, wanting to be on the other side of the table, like wanting to be an entrepreneur myself. um, and so I had applied to Stanford as my for my master's. And actually part of the funny story there is like I applied because it was unclear that I was going to actually get my H1 visa. It was one of those years where there was so many applications that they were essentially doing a lottery to pick who gets it.
Yeah.
And as luck would have had it, I did not get my visa. And so then I got into Stanford, and uh, you know, I joined Stanford the week Lehman Brothers collapsed. And so in some ways, like, what luck to go back into school while the financial crisis happened. But at Stanford, I sort of, you know, one of the things I guess that was different at Stanford compared to Purdue was that I was paying for it myself. Some of it from savings, some of it from sort of research assistantship that I'd gotten,
Hmm.
and so in some ways it sort of like freed me to do what I wanted to do. Like, in some ways, like Purdue, I was just very focused academically because it was, sort of like hard earned savings of parents being put into a US college degree. And I just felt like, okay, if nothing else, I need to make sure I just sort of nail my classes. Stanford had felt a little bit sort of like, okay, well, I'm gonna take courses that allows me to start companies. That was like my goal. Like I was there less for grades and more for just meeting new people, starting projects with the hope that something takes off. And we started a lot of different projects when I was at Stanford. The first 5 quarters, there was a lot of things that sort of like, you know, things started but sort of flamed out. And I was about to sort of give up on this dream of starting my own company. And as luck would have had it, in my last quarter at Stanford, we built Pulse, which was a news app that really took off. And that became a company, and that was my first startup that I spent a few years before LinkedIn acquired us.
Hmm. Yeah, I think Pulse was one of the fastest growing, news aggregator app out there, and yeah, as you said, even in LinkedIn, I heard Pulse was one of the fastest growing product, and you ended up leading product, and you were head of LinkedIn India. How was the journey like? First of all, when you ended up selling your company, what was the feeling like?
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's a sense of relief. I think that a good outcome for us individually, but also for investors, and I think there's a um, you know. It was like a three intense years, and so in some ways there was a sense of just like sigh of relief that it landed in a smooth way. I think there's also a sense of like, I think, confusion when in many ways it feels like life up until that point was about making just enough salary to live comfortably and to eat good food and to be able to like make a trip or two to India.
Mhm.
And suddenly you feel like you've made so much wealth where you don't have to worry about those sort of day-to-day things. And the part that's confusing is that it actually makes you wonder what is the driving force then, right? It's like it's easier when it's just like, okay, like graduating from college, I remember my first salary full-time role was $60,000 a year. And I was thrilled that that was the thing. And so after selling Pulse, I think there was a sense of like, oh, there's more wealth that I could imagine, and what do I do with it? And I remember first year or two, I didn't really change anything about it. I just sort of like put it aside, and didn't change anything about my life because it felt like I needed that time to almost like get comfortable with the idea. Uh, and I think that's probably a good recommendation for anybody who does get a windfall, is to not try to like move fast. Like, I think let it settle in. And um, and then, yeah, I think, I mean, in many ways, I think as you spend more time thinking about what it enables, you realize you can actually like dream bigger things. You can invest in your passion projects. You can, you know, uh, I, I, I used to sort of like, you know, maybe park my car 3 blocks away just so that I don't have to pay the parking fees. And like, I don't do that anymore. Like, I think like if there's like a expense that's less than $10-15, then I sort of like, give myself that convenience. Uh, but I think we all are sort of how we all grew up is sort of still like who we are, right? I don't think, and I think I'm sort of proud of that, where I I I feel like growing up we had money for everything that we really needed, and and not money for everything that we wanted, right? Like I think it was the right upbringing, and in many ways, like I have two young kids now, and I think a lot about, how do I pass on the same set of values to them, because it's actually treated me well in my life, is to sort of keep it simple in many ways.
Gotcha. And Akshay, next up, would love to, talk more about your journey with LinkedIn and how did Notion happen. And we'll also talk about where are we today with Notion and what's the future looks like.
Yeah, so I mean, I think LinkedIn was fun. I mean, I spent the first half of my LinkedIn journey just integrating Pulse into LinkedIn, which was a lot of the content that you see in the homepage today. That was not the case 10 years ago when we were acquired. A lot of the homepage feed has really transformed by the team that built Pulse. Many of them are still there actually 10 years later, which is amazing. Um, After spending about 3 years doing that, I decided I sort of spent enough time in the US and I wanted to sort of move back to India. And so I remember going to LinkedIn CEO Jeff's office and letting him know that my sort of journey with LinkedIn had come to an end, and that I was moving back to India to do something back home. And in typical Jeff fashion, I think he said, you're not done yet. Come back tomorrow with what you want to do, and we'll figure out a way to like continue the journey. And I think he essentially offered me to, um, you know, let me sort of move to India, but then go run LinkedIn in India. And it was an amazing opportunity because in some ways, like I at that point I was thinking a lot about like my own journey and how I got lucky in the journey I had had, right? Like the fact that I got an opportunity to come to the US for college, the fact that I was able to do a master's at, a tier one college and then start a company that was acquired. Like many things sort of like happened. Like I definitely worked hard, but I think there's a lot of luck involved in this whole journey. And so one of the things I was thinking about is like, how do we make more people in India get lucky? Like, how do we like enable more opportunities for, an average Indian? And and I was thinking of doing this independently. Like that was just like personally what was interesting to me. And so when Jeff offered me that opportunity, it sort of felt like this perfect intersection of what I personally wanted to do and what I could actually professionally do. LinkedIn, in many ways, is the best platform to sort of enable, Indians to go get their dream jobs. And I the 3 years I spent there was amongst the most fulfilling parts of my professional journey because it felt like solving India's problems one job at a time. And the amount of like the work that we did there was really super close to me personally. We One of the projects we built there was LinkedIn Lite, which was really trying to make sure LinkedIn works in tier two and tier three cities in India. And it was inspired because I remember doing a user study in Indore or Pune, I think one of the cities, and like LinkedIn did not load for many seconds. And I think it was inspired us to sort of like build something that works well for everyone in India. So we did amazing work there. I really enjoyed my time there. And after spending 5.5 years at LinkedIn, I sort of felt like I had given everything I had to give to LinkedIn, and I'd also learned everything that I could have learned there. And it was time for like a new venture. And I think my default plan was to start something in India because we were based in Bangalore. But as luck would have had it, I reconnected with Ivan, the Notion CEO. Notion was actually the first company I'd invested in. So after Pulse was acquired by LinkedIn, I invested my first investment was in Notion in 2013, and in 2018, it had finally like hit some level of product market fit. And so Ivan offered me to um, join the company as a COO, and yeah, that was pretty much it. Like I did not talk to any other company. I did not think about anything else, but it just felt like you know the right opportunity at the right time.
Yeah.
But it was actually not that obvious. I remember talking to a lot of people in India and telling them that I was moving back to the US to pursue this, I think most people had not heard about Notion. Most people thought most people thought that I was making a mistake giving up the role I had at LinkedIn and take on this like riskier venture. Um, so in many ways, I'm very grateful that the last 6 years have panned out better than I even dreamed of back then. But I remember it being a very non-obvious decision, back in that day.
Yeah, yeah. I use Notion, and Notion has become almost a verb in India in the Indian technology ecosystem. Akshay, you so it was a non-obvious decision at the time. If you were to pick one core reason, Akshay, for you to say yes to Ivan to join Notion, what was that? What was that? What convinced you?
The most interesting bit was the role itself. I think I'm a product person. I've sort of most of my life sort of spent a lot of time building products. And Ivan said, "Why don't you join as a COO and you get to run everything except product?" Because
Hmm.
he's a product CEO.
Yeah.
And to me, that was actually kind of appealing in the sense that I had spent so much time at LinkedIn wondering why sales operated the way it did, or why marketing operated the way it did, or why people teams operated. I obviously worked with these teams before, but I never really, you know, built these
Mhm.
teams myself. And as a product person, it seemed kind of exciting to bring the systems thinking, um, first principles thinking to these new functions. And here was a company that had early signs of product market fit, but none of the company part built out. And so this idea that I could, sort of really build up our go to market engine and then build up our people, finance, legal teams from scratch.
Mhm.
Uh, there's something about that company building that really resonated with me.
Yeah.
Um, and then I think so I think as a product person, sort of having to spend that time and really gaining that experience and really sort of scaling the business was what probably like really really sort of appealed to me.
Mhm.
And in many ways I sort of feel like my zone of genius is this intersection of product and business. And so I think like yeah, it was in many ways like when I first heard it, it seemed a bit odd to tell a product person to do everything except product. but
Mhm.
um but I think what Ivan was also trying to do there was to find a partner
Yeah.
who can um, respect the unique business model that Notion had, and then build the rest of the company in a in sort of like through first principles, right? Like not just try to take what works in all these different things and just like repeat it here, but think about like, hey, what's unique about Notion, and how do we like build all these functions around it that really does justice for the company it is.
Mhm.
And so I really sort of commend him for sort of wanting to do that. And it's been an amazing partnership, and we've been working together for 6 years now. Actually 6 months ago, I after my journey on all these other functions, I actually moved back to product. So now I run product at LinkedIn, at Notion. And it's been fun to experience all of these other functions and now come back to product. I feel like a better product operator for all that experience.
Mhm. Akshay, you mentioned luck multiple times. Was there can you share a story or an experience that really shaped your career in the US?
I think like it's been an interesting experience where I reflect back on this thing where I feel like in many ways like I have always thought about, like in multiple times I've wanted to do a specific thing, and in many cases that specific thing hasn't actually panned out, doesn't actually pan out. uh, and then some other opportunity shows up, and though that opportunity ends up being like a better opportunity than what I had sort of like originally thought about. And so this has happened multiple times in my life where almost feels like when one door closes, maybe like a few other doors open up, and the other doors almost tends to be like more interesting and more productive. And
Mhm.
so I think like I've sort of grown to realize that when things don't pan out the way they do, I sort of like, I keep my eyes open and my ears open, and I'm almost like, okay, there must be something around the corner
Hmm.
that is better than this. Um, and so, in many ways, like, I think you can call this luck, right? Because I think it's like, you know, the fact that um, I did not get my H-1 visa and found myself in a college, studying while the whole world collapsed financially, through the financial crisis here, it was like truly luck. Or the fact that, you know, Pulse happened in my last quarter, right when iPad had launched and became a company, and the fact that Steve Jobs mentioned it, it was just like a series of like right timing and the right place, the right time, and so there's some, I don't know, some mysterious energy, some mysterious blessing that I found myself, and I'm sort of humble enough to recognize it's not just the inputs are definitely there in terms of hard work, but I think there's an element of timing and luck that has been very supportive to me as well. Um, and so yeah, so I feel very grateful to have had the journey I've had so far, and I think in many ways, I think a lot about like, so many people have helped me along the journey, and in many ways I find myself wanting to like pay that forward, right? It's like an example is like, I sort of keep my Twitter DMs open, and a lot of the DMs are pretty like spammy, and like I don't respond to them, but every once in a while, you'll hear from someone. In fact, you and I may have connected on Twitter also. Like I think you DM'd me, where every once in a while people write a very thoughtful question, or they reach out for help, and I try as much as possible to say yes to those things now, um, because I think many people did that for me.
Yeah, I love it, Akshay. What a journey you've had so far, and the way you're really now giving it forward, because you realize that there were a lot of people around you that have helped you get to where you are today. And Akshay, you mentioned that when you sold your company, that's when you started thinking there could be more, one can think bigger and do a bunch of other things. And you were one of the core guys at LinkedIn. LinkedIn is one of the most iconic companies of our times. And now, of course, Notion. How do you really set and control your ambition, Akshay?
I think, like, I mean, net, I think one of the things I've realized is that, I think you gotta dream big, I think, to make things happen. And if anything, actually, like being lucky in having an early exit when I was young has enabled me to dream bigger. Um, uh, but at the same time, I feel like there's an element of like, what are you at the core, what are you trying to do? And I think one of the things I realized about like all the failed projects I had at Stanford versus Pulse that actually worked, there's this very fine line between uh, your desire to start a company, or your desire to become an entrepreneur, your desire to live the startup life. uh, there's a fine line between that and your desire to solve a problem, right? Like, and I think the latter, like the ability to actually like discover a certain problem that you are annoyed with, or you find people around you annoyed with, and your ability to actually want to go solve that problem, is a great starting point. Is a much better starting point than wanting to start a company, right? It's almost like you start with solving a customer problem, and then it's almost like the company is built around that idea. And so and so I think, like, on a micro level, I feel like a lot of the dreams probably starts with, what is the problem you're trying to solve, or what is the reality, or what is the dream you're sort of trying to like bring to this world, um, and and then working on that problem is a good way to sort of like continue to scale ambitions, right? As you make more progress. So I think recently we crossed 100 million users in Notion, and I don't think that was like necessarily a dream like 4 or 5 years ago when we were like, I think maybe like a million users five years ago, right? Um, and one of the things that I think about is like, well, one is power of compounding. The fact that we could even get to 100 million in 5 years is extraordinary. But
Mm,
also, like, you continue to scale your ambition. When we had originally started Notion, we thought that our audience is a billion knowledge workers, right? Um, and but I think we had to start somewhere. Now that we're at 100 million, we sort of feel like, wow, like the fact that 10% of knowledge workers have at least discovered Notion is quite extraordinary. And the fact that we can actually get to a billion maybe in the next decade is actually doable. Like it's actually something we can do. Um, and so I wonder if there's like to your question of the scaling ambition, I think part of it is like you got to start somewhere so that you can make progress. And then progress in some ways feeds you energy to continue to scale your ambitions, right?
mm,
And um and so I think, yeah, I think like I the thing I sort of one of the things I learned at Stanford at the design school was this very simple concept of like having a bias towards action. uh Up until that class that I took at the design school, I would think a lot of ideas in my head, but I wouldn't do anything about it. Right? I would just dream like, oh, wouldn't it be great if you built this, or wouldn't it be great if it did that? But I didn't do anything about it. It just stayed in my head.
mm,
And one of the things I learned at the design school was like, just like then have a bias towards action. Like what's a prototype you can build in the next 45 minutes? Like what's a better one that you can build in the next 2 weeks? What's a better one you can build in the next 2 months? And you like scale the resolution of those ideas.
mm.
And if you're able to do that, I think you're at least making progress, and like the progress then helps you like dream bigger and bigger.
Yeah. Actually, you've stayed connected to India all through and through LinkedIn, and you were recently in India, and of course now with Notion as well. You have a team that's building up in Hyderabad. You were in India. You spent a lot of time, and you've seen the journey of Indian technology ecosystem. I think you're probably one of the very few guys who really understands, who could see, who has a lens of the Silicon Valley. You've seen, how the story has played out. Now you're seeing how the story is getting played out in India. How has Indian ecosystem evolved over the years, and what are you most excited about the Indian technology ecosystem?
There's a lot of things to be excited about. You know, I think when I reflect back, at least like, I spent a lot of my time in the 90s in India. And I think the 90s, or maybe early 2000s, uh, there, the types of companies that were really scaling in India were, these sort of services oriented companies like around the BPOs and sort of the outsourcing firms. And in many ways, like, I don't know, I feel like Narayan Murthy and Nandan Nilekani and what Azim Premji did with Wipro were really sort of the role models for us in terms of what is possible in terms of really building a company that's public in the US markets. Um, I think the next decade, or maybe the last decade in some ways, the 2010 to 2020 era was extremely exciting because you started to see not just services, like the back office services, we started to see this new flavor of products that enable services almost, right? So like the Flipkarts of the world is like a product like that was homegrown that enabled you to like get you know things delivered to your home. So it's still like in the back end it's still a bit of a services company, but actually there's the product that was built on top of it, that was serving India, and it's super exciting to see that generation of founders. uh, I think what's happening now is even cooler. It's like, some of these people who actually worked at these companies have graduated, and they've realized that we not only have the engineering horsepower in India, but we are also starting to have um, really good design talent who understand how to build extremely well designed products in India. And we also have like extremely ambitious founders who are willing to like move to the US and learn how to do go to market and like and so now this evolution has gone from services to product with services to like real full on products, like products built in India that can serve a global audience. And that's actually super exciting because in many ways, um, what Girish has done with Freshdesk, or what Zoho has done, or bunch of new SaaS companies have done, is they've actually built something in India that is able to compete with global leaders in those categories, and give them a run for their money. And I think that's going to inspire a whole new generation of entrepreneurs who can take on these mega categories in the US and like compete with them head on. And so um, and I think there's a bit of a there's when you think about like, okay, what makes Silicon Valley is that they've had a few different generation of entrepreneurs, right? And each generation that wins funds the next generation, right? And so now if you're in the Bay Area, you can actually find people who are extremely experienced, who have seen true scale, and they can bring that experience to your company. uh, India is actually on that journey, right? It's like maybe a generation or two behind, but now you have real people who've seen real scale, like people who've worked at Flipkart, or maybe the newer companies like Dream 11 or Hotstar. I mean, they've seen like crazy scale, like world scale, that they can then apply to the next startup they work at, right? And so I don't know. I think there's a lot to be excited about. But the thing that I'm personally sort of excited about on the software lenses, things that are built in India but is globally competitive.
Mhm. Gotcha. No, you're right, Akshay. In the last, I would say, 2 to 4 years, we are seeing, there's about what, 100, unicorns, and the founders and operators of these companies, as their second journey, either they're starting up or they are backing other founders. And the rate at which these companies are growing is much, much faster than those earlier ones. And I think it's only going to compound. In Akshay, as you said, you've been involved. How are you being involved in the Indian technology ecosystem outside of Notion? And also, uh, uh, is India still on the cards for you? You might end up in India building, or how's that?
Yeah, I make it a point to visit often. Maybe once at least, well, at least once a year, maybe twice a year, and I spend a fair bit of time there.
Hmm.
Um, I think I I've made a few investments in India that have been a way of like staying in touch with sort of the startup ecosystem in India. Uh, I wish to do more, but I think there's always a little bit of a sort of the time zone differences, but also I think like my day job at Notion keeps me quite busy, and so it's a bit hard to keep up with that. Um, we're very excited to continue to scale our operations and engineering office in Hyderabad. So we're almost up to like 60 people there. We have a beautiful new office, and personally, that's exciting to like go back to India as a way to also like see that grow.
Hmm.
And it's very much a front office. It's not a back office support function. It's you have core engineers, core R&D, operation where we're building products that is used by the world there. So that's actually pretty exciting. It's the only office we have on R&D outside the US, and we're very excited about the leadership we have there. Um, Whether India's on the cards, like I really enjoyed my time in Bangalore, and the 3 years I spent there. And I would on the personal front like move in a heartbeat. Like I would have no concerns moving back. I really enjoyed my the stint that I did there, and it's an easy transition for someone who spent a lot of time in the Bay Area. Like Bangalore is actually, except for the traffic, is like an easy transition back. Um, when that might happen or how that might happen, I don't know. At the moment, I'm committed to sort of seeing Notion through,
Mhm.
and there's a lot of like unfinished work here, and so I think it might be limited to visits home to sort of continue to sort of scale Notion, but um, but yeah, I every time I visit, I feel alive. I think India's like you can see the growth on the streets, right? I think you can see just how much India is building. I used to live in Ahmedabad, and like there used to be this like long stretch of forests that you would go through until you get to Gandhinagar and to the cricket stadium. And I feel like in the last 10 years, like that whole stretch is gone. Like it's all like fully built out. And it's kind of fun to see all these cities like, scaling so fast and so much building happening, right? I think it's a sign of progress in many ways. And so, anyways, super excited to like stay plugged in.
Mhm.
When I will move is sort of an open question for
Hope to see that happening, Akshay, personally for me. But thank you so much for really contributing to the India's growth story through capital, mentorship, and your influence. And Akshay, we'll move into our final part now. Co-pilot is getting restless. He wants to get in, and he's asking, what are you most obsessed about uh, outside of work lately?
Well, I have two young kids, so I feel like a lot of my life revolves around them. And um, I think one of the things I've been thinking a lot about is like, how do I teach them um, to create more versus consume more? And I think this is actually like core to like how I think about my journey with Notion too, is like a lot of the old ideas with, computing. I think like the pioneers really thought of computing devices like the phone or the computer as devices to really express your creativity and to create more. Um, and I think we spend a lot of time, like, these days consuming a lot of content. Um, and I think that's fine as long as we can find the right balance of actually like building and creating things as well. And um, so as an experiment, I sort of like, for my 7-year-old daughter, I actually like introduced our first computer at home. And I said, like, I'm not going to put time limits on how much you can use it, but the only requirement is that you have to create things on this. This is not a place to watch videos or do other things. And, it's actually kind of fun to see her um, pick up Notion. She's picked up Keynote and she's, expressing her creativity through those things. And I think that gives me a lot of joy. Outside of that, I also really love the outdoors. And I think the Bay Area is such a such a gifted place in terms of you're just 20 minutes away from the beach, 20 minutes away from like the redwoods, and trying to get my whole family into hiking because that is something that I really sort of find peace and sort of really rejuvenates me. So that's probably something that I try to do over the weekends.
Gotcha. And Akshay, we know you as a builder, as an entrepreneur. What do your friends know you for? Who are you outside of work?
I'm a big foodie. I think
I
I
see.
I really enjoy eating local foods. I think if you see my Twitter, I feel like my every fourth tweet is probably about food. Um, and yeah, so I think I, there's that saying like, some people eat to live, and some people live to eat. I'm definitely on the sort of second category there. And like, even if I think about like vacations for me is all about like, what are we gonna eat? What are we gonna, do? And so yeah, so I think I am sort of obsessed with food. And I'm vegetarian, so that's already like a big filter in terms of what I can eat. But I try to find, the best places to sort of explore, and I try new cuisines all the time. Um, I think going to India has become super fun because I didn't really um, appreciate this growing up, but now I feel like trying all the hole in the wall places that are um, almost institutions, right? Like people who've been serving the same exact food for 30, 50, 70 years. And if you go to Delhi, you can find places that are even like, doing the same thing 100 plus years, multiple generations trying to like, create the same paratha or the same kulfi. I think it's super fun. So much history, so much love into those products. So I think we can probably spend another 45 minutes just talking about different food.
Next time you're in Delhi NCR, Akshay, I'll be taking you around. Please do ping me. And thank you so much for coming on the pod, really sharing your incredible journey as of now, and also how you're contributing towards the growth of the Indian technology ecosystem. Appreciate it, Akshay.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Shiva. And congrats to you also for what you've built with this podcast, and wish you all the very best.
Thank you.